Men are the prize, the podcast. Welcome. I'm Harvey. I'm your host. How are you? As I like to ask, how was your week? How are you doing? How is your soul, your psyche? How are you feeling? Hope it's good. Let's start this week with a little, I don't know, let's see, behind the scenes, I guess. You know, the podcast is called Men Are the Prize. And you know, I like the word prize because it reflects on us men. It's not a word that's always used to describe us. It's usually described for typically the women that we're chasing. They're the prize. But when I came up with this, I wanted that word to be synonymous with men because, you know, I think we're pretty cool too. I think we're pretty awesome. So when I thought of that word and I thought about all that it encompasses, it occurs to me for us to feel like we're the prize, it requires a few things. You need to like yourself. You got to like yourself and know enough to recognize your value, to know that you need to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. You need to feel good about your surroundings, about your family, about your goals, about everything you do. To do that, it requires a level of confidence that not everybody has. And we are lucky to have a confidence coach with us. So we're going to talk to him. But you know how I really start these podcasts. I am a man who likes to talk, but more importantly, I'm a man who likes to hear other men talk. That's what this podcast is. This is a space for men to speak and for other men to hear it so that we normalize it, so that you feel comfortable releasing whatever's going on. We don't store that stuff in because, you know, that work happens when we don't release it in a healthy manner. Then we're toxic, and we don't do toxicity here. We are healthy, vulnerable, open, emotional men here. And every week it is a reminder that it is okay to do so. So if you get nothing else from this podcast, be comfortable talking to somebody about what's going on. Because if you don't, it sticks in here. And then when it comes out, and inevitably it will, it can come out bad, unhealthy, and we don't like that. And with that said, the guest, and I love a good bio, so I got the piece of paper here. I'm going to read on. Dillon, is it Andres?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I got it first try. All right. And this is his bio, self-titled. My name is Dillon, or some know me, Coach Wolverine, former suicidal powerlifter working in nightclubs, turned charismatic confidence coach. I am the creator of the Wolverine Lifestyle, where I pilot you on the journey to find your why and shift your perception on life. My passion is to help people change their lives in the most simple and realistic way possible. I believe everyone deserves the right to be confident in who they are and live to own the life they truly want to live. Dillon Andres, welcome to the podcast. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Harvey. Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. I'm glad to have you. So I like bios. I love reading them. I like concise. I like long. I like them all. But let's just say I saw you on the street. I knew who you were, but I didn't have an opportunity to maybe read the written bio. If you had 10 seconds to tell me on the street about you, what would you say?
I'm an individual that cares. I've been guilty of caring too much. And basically, I want to see everybody reach their level of success, men and women included. Right now, of course, in my life, though, men being the primary focus, because there's that social facade that needs to be laid to rest once and for all. And that social facade being that men have to, we're not allowed to talk about feelings. We're not allowed to be sensitive. We're not allowed to be vulnerable. And so in a nutshell, that's what I'm here to do, is change. Be the person who I needed when I was younger and be that for somebody who needs it today.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So if you haven't listened to this podcast before, if you're a new listener, thanks. I appreciate you listening. The title is Men Are the Prize. I take the word prize and I take the letters. 4 of the letters represent characteristics that I think are good ones for men. The first letter in the word prize is P. The word is purpose. Reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. Dillon, what is your purpose?
Well, actually, I feel like my purpose, I just outlined that in that 10-second clip there, is be who I needed when I was younger and be that for somebody today. That is something that has resonated me for a very, very long time. And that has been my motto carrying me through my coaching business. And even before I was in business, is just how I lived.
Okay. Why did you need a you while you were growing up? What was going on?
Felt very lonely. Even though I had people around, they never really seemed to be there. They There was a certain level of understanding that never seemed to be there. Even though I grew up knowing a ton of people, I grew up in a small town, but then going into from a small town to high school, where there was a very large high school, knew a lot of people. It always felt like I was being looked through, not at. And it didn't matter what I would say. There was always a lack of validation and conversation, where even when I did try to breach that level of vulnerability to speak what I needed, the emotions to get out, people just weren't there in the capacity that I felt I needed at the time. So throughout the years, that's kind of when I learned that men are just expected to deal with their own shit on their own, and that most people don't want to hear it unless they're in the type of work like yourself or myself, where that is the actual focal point and perspective. And so that basically sums it up. It just was I felt very alone, very misunderstood. A lot of nights spent alone in my bedroom, contemplating life, and unfortunately to the not good corners of the brain many of the nights as well.
Understood. I'm a father of four, and I understand when I hear you talking about kind of growing up and not having somebody there for you, but having a lot of people around you, it makes me think of the idea of I'm in a house with kids, and there's a difference between being in the house and being present.
Mm-hmm.
I can just be here, or I can be a force, a part of your life. And it sounds like that's kind of what it was. Like you had people around you, but they weren't present with you,
Yeah.
which is annoying.
It
So,
is. And, first and foremost, it is your parents, right? My parents unfortunately did not have a healthy relationship. My dad left when I was 16. He is still an alcoholic. I love both my parents very dearly. And they are both very, very good people. They do have their issues. But dealing with the alcoholism part or aspect of my father was always a struggle. And it was only recently that I realized how much that it actually impacted every asset or every aspect, my mistake, of my life. And yeah, he was there, but never really present because of that unhealthy vice that is so easily accessible and socially acceptable.
so the alcoholism is there. You see it. You don't really recognize while it's happening. I guess while you're around it, how much of an effect it has on you. Once you realized it, was one of the concerns. Obviously, alcoholism is something that kind of DNA. You can kind of pass that on. Was that a concern of yours that maybe this is something in my DNA that I can't control and it's going to happen? Or how did you feel about it for yourself?
Well, the funny thing is I actually did struggle with alcohol in my teens. So being that I grew up in a small town, I started drinking at a very young age. Parents were known. I wasn't sneaking behind their back by any means. My parents handed me what I was allowed to drink that evening. And after that, it was done. And so it was like, yeah, we lived in the small town, Marshall, Saskatchewan.
Okay.
And yeah, so I was drinking at the age of 12. And then when I was in high school, my dad left when I was 16, and I had to work what was considered full-time hours at Walmart to help pay for my own stuff. Because at this time of my life, I just discovered health and fitness. So I started to go to the gym, trying to eat healthier, but I had to pay for my own groceries because my mom wasn't able to afford to pay for the types of food that I was eating, and then for my three siblings as well, because my two sisters were in competitive gymnastics and my brother was in competitive trampoline. And so being that I was in the gym, I was eating healthy. I also had volleyball that I was in when I was in high school. And so, yeah, I had to work full time to be able to afford to be able to pay for all those things, to be able to pay for my gas, be able to pay for, having a car, cell phone, etc., etc. And I got this is where a lot of that loneliness started settling in, right? Where it seemed to be the only thing that was in common with my friends in high school was, yeah, let's go party. And I had this belief that that was just the social expectation that we did in high school, was go to house parties and drink. And I remember witnessing a lot of the stuff that happened at the house parties and just being like, why am I doing this? Like, why is this a thing? Why do I think this is cool? But because I was part of the volleyball team, I was considered a jock, right? This is just what we did, until my 19th birthday. I had gotten a little bit intoxicated on 2/3 of a bottle of absinthe, which is a lot stronger than most alcohols. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found myself doing basically dumb shit. I remember we climbed a grain elevator. I was in my flip-flops with the drink. And so, like, looking out, like, this thing was like 30 stories in the air, like, give or take. And I remember being up there and looking down. I'm like, man, if I fell from here, I'm dead. And it was kind of after that night where I'm like, this needs to stop. And so I didn't want to admit that I had a problem. So I masked my not drinking with health. So I just quit drinking cold turkey for 3 years and told everyone it was for my fitness goals or health goals. And there's some truth to that, but the reality is that I was terrified of becoming an alcoholic like my father. And it runs on my mom's side of my family too. My grandfather was an alcoholic, my aunt's an alcoholic, a few other relatives were alcoholics. So it's a very predominant thing in my family.
Oh, wow. Wow. Pervasive in your family. That's
Yeah.
wow. And well, one first good bit of news, just hearing you talk about it, that's just something that you didn't like take you down. So
No.
that's good. Not all of us are able to handle something, especially when we're so young. And we've got
Mhm.
enough going on just trying to grow up and dealing with the social aspect of school and athletics and education. But obviously, a level of strength of yours was already coming out. So I applaud you.
Thank you.
No problem. The next letter in the word prize is R, and the word is resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. I feel like you kind of answered my questions before I get to them because you're telling me everything, which is great, but but I'll still get to it. Can you think of a particular situation, and you might have already told us one, of a particular situation where something happened where you discovered you had resilience that you didn't know you had?
Oh, um, so a few years after all of this stuff, so during my first business adventure, actually, I used to own a gym. It was a niche gym, powerlifting and strongman. And I'd owned this gym with my best friend, and my now ex-fiance was heavily involved in the graphic designing aspect of it. And so this was quite a bit in the beginning when I first got into powerlifting, and I was prepping for my first meet. And my relationship with my fiance was very rocky at the time. Honestly, I don't know what all had happened, but I was very much like, hey, let's go to couples counseling, let's do this, let's do that. I know at the time we were trying to get pregnant, and I found out that I actually am unable to have kids, so I know that was a big rift there. And then I remember one day she decided to just leave. All of her stuff was packed up and moved out in 24 hours. And I felt it was one of my rock bottoms. And to the point where I call into work that night. And at that time, even though I own the gym, I was working part-time as a security guard, a doorman at the nightclubs, because we weren't pulling a wage from the gym at that time because it was still so fresh. And so I called into work, and I'm like, I'm checking myself into the hospital, because like this woman at the time is somebody who I thought was going to be my happily ever after, and basically the rug was pulled out right out from under me. And so it was a very tough thing for me to swallow. So called in to my boss, drove to the hospital. My business partner ended up meeting me there, and he basically sat with me while I talked to this therapist and talked me down, and then sat with me for the rest of the night. And I remember just how low I felt. And then after, when my buddy had left, sitting in my house, just how alone I felt in that house. How I that my life just started kind of even teetering even further. Like, I thought I was at my low point, then the business started to crumble. I was not making enough of an income, so I actually had to steal from work to eat, because my bills would literally just cover my mortgage. It would just cover the utilities and whatnot. So the nightclubs I worked in as a doorman were attached to a hotel, and so I was needed to steal food to survive. Still somehow managed to get myself through my powerlifting competition. My first meet ended up taking second in my weight class somehow. But I remember coming out of that lowest point there and realizing that I was killing myself over this woman, when in reality I should have been thanking this God, the universe, because how that situation panned out made me realize she wasn't who I thought she was, and I was putting my entire value of myself based on her and that relationship. And once I was able to differentiate the two, my life started to be able to crawl back up. And that's when I first really started actually being aware of around me, the personal development, getting the ideas of actually becoming a coach, because people started asking me where I was getting certain perspectives from. And so that's kind of what led me right into where I am today.
Okay. Wow. That's quite a story. And you're still here, which is the most important thing. And that's the most important thing. We go through a lot of crap, but how we come out on the end is the most important thing. You mentioned that kind of the reason you do this is so that you can have somebody like you, I guess, while you were growing up, the person that you were missing.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of men, and I've always found, and you really kind of fit in with this. I've talked to a lot of men who dealt with addiction, divorce, abuse. And a lot of times when we grow up, we literally become the thing we were missing when we were growing up. I've spoken to men who grew up and were abused in their homes. They become social workers. I talked to men who grew up with a parent who was an alcoholic. They work for, AA. They help men through these ordeals. They literally become the thing. And it sounds like you fit that in too. You needed a person to talk to hear you. And then you start a business where you're that guy.
Yep.
And I feel a lot of ways when we grow up, our purpose is kind of thrust upon us. Our life kind of makes us what we need to be. So it sounds like you are just the kind of person a lot of us men would need, that person that we could talk to. And most importantly, the fact that you're the business partner, a friend who could sit there with you and talk you through a lot of this stuff, which a lot of men don't have, is a beautiful thing too. So again, life sucks, but it's a lot easier when you have friends to help you through it. So it is good to hear. I skipped the I. I saved that for the end. The next letter in the word prize is Z. The word is zeal. Zeal is enthusiastic devotion. What are you enthusiastically devoted
Yeah. Finding the why. I love knowing how things work. And that includes the mind, how the mind works, how the human brain comes up with scenarios. We create our own narratives that we believe. And this spans at everything. Like, so I'm kind of one of those individuals that's like a fix-it person. The washing machine breaks, I'll figure it out. I used to be a mechanic back in the day as well. And so taking things apart, figuring out how it works, putting it back together. But it's just, there's something that really lights an interest in me about the human mind and why we think the way that we do. And the concepts of, our truth is only our truth. And it's only 50% right, because we only see it through the lens of our own perspective. And, different concepts like that, or how there's a different version of us in every single person's mind. And so just when blowing that up for me, like, it's just, it's cool to be in an industry that I actually just get excited to read about. Like I catch myself just researching the brain, researching psychology and sociology and all this kind of stuff, because it legitimately excites me to know how this stuff works, why we tick this way, and how our social surroundings and our environment can impact us a certain way. And like, we pull ourselves out of an environment, even if we don't want to change, we're going to, purely because what's surrounding us is different. And so I get to answer your question the best there. That would be it, is just how the why behind things are the way they are. And even though we can't figure that out, for me, it's conceptual, right? It's like, is this though? Right. Cause I'm like, I'll be honest. There's like, conspiracy theories and stuff like that I'll read and be like, what if? That's a little far out there, but what if? And it's just a cool concept to me. And that's I think that's the best way I can answer that question for you on this go.
That's a good, being open to all possibilities is a good thing, especially in this business that we kind of choose. That you need to be open to any possibilities. Since you're kind of talking about how the mind works and how it ticks, and you help men and women through research and through just working with people, have you found a difference between how the male mind works and how the female mind works?
There are, that's a very good question. I see just as many differences as similarities. But the biggest similarity I see amongst everybody is that we're all insecure and we all think that everyone else has everything figured out.
That's so true. Isn't that the whole basis of really what social media is? We're seeing what everybody else is doing, and I wish I could go on that vacation and they're filming it from their bedroom with a pillow and some lights and such. Simple, but such a great point. Imagine if we all spoke to each other and realized that we're all kind of struggling together. How much easier life would be.
It would be so vastly different in how we try to lead a life to impress all of these other people, but where the vast majority of us go home, we don't care about all these other people, right? Like we think about ourselves mostly, but then we get in our little hole and we're so concerned. It's like, is everyone else thinking about me? No, everyone else isn't thinking about us, right? Are you thinking about everyone else? No, other than the wonder if they're thinking about you. That is literally as far as a lot of this goes. And so I find it fun because like I do this too, right? I do this too. I even catch myself and be like, really, Dillon? Why are you really, like, better? Why are you doing this? Right? I've fallen down the anxiety toilet of social media too. You get on a scrolling tangent and be like, wow, like why is this person's life better than mine? I work hard. When in reality, is as you just said, a lot of those pictures are done dressed from their bed, or they angle it properly in front of their big computer screen or their TV, right, to make it look good, right? It's because we put on this facade to try and one up other people, and it's like a habitual thing. And then when you break it down to the very bare minimum of it, is all stems from our ego, because we don't want to be vulnerable. And so I think so like there are so many differences and similarities I see between how men and women are wired, and I see that there are so many. For societal, it's a lot more open for women to talk about mental health and feelings. Definitely. Right? Whereas it's not for men. Like it's like, I know, like in my friend circle, it's just like to talk about anything that's alternative is just very, you just don't. Like for example, okay, so I like a lot of natural and holistic stuff. This includes, like, I have an astrology business coach. I also I'm fascinated by crystals and the energies of crystals and whatnot. And a lot of guys you don't hear talk about this stuff. Right. And I was at my buddy's, basically it was the pre-wedding bridesmaids and groomsmen meetup, and all of the groomsmen were making fun of the women because they were talking about crystals or whatever. It's like, oh, you use crystals too, or you have crystals in your pocket, and they're all making fun of them. And then I'm standing there and I reach my hand or my pocket, my hand into my pocket and pull out a handful of crystals. I put them on the table. I'm like, man, I like crystals too. Like, what of it? And then they tried making fun of me, and I'm like, do you guys really think I care that you're making fun of me because I like I enjoy crystals. Like A, they look cool. B, like I just don't care. Like, so what if, even if you don't think that they work, right? Which, they're vibrational, they're energy, right? So it's like they can be proven through science, or if you want to believe through them through spirituality, right? It really doesn't matter. Just because it's not your thing doesn't mean it's wrong. And so I found it very interesting, but like that was one of the differences. Is a lot of men I see with a lot of they close themselves off to these things, because one of the people in that group a couple days later asked me, he's like, hey man, so where did you actually get those crystals from? That kind of interested me. And I'm like, well, you were making fun of me at the party. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's like, so like, you know what? I'm not saying they're for everyone, and I get that they're not for everyone.
Right.
But I've noticed that, amongst men, if something is different or alternative, we're a lot more quick to just be like, no. Whereas a lot more women will be at least a little bit more curious to each other. But when it comes to the insecurities, I find a lot of it is just the same. Like for instance, going to the gym. Women will be nice to each other's face, but then be very petty and catty behind their back if they're jealous of each other. Right. And then depending on, like, a lot of men, I see the exact same thing. They'll be bros face to face, but then talk shit about each other behind their back. And it all stems from the insecurity of the ego, and which I've gotten myself caught up into. Actually, one of my really good friends was one of those guys. Is like, I don't like this guy. He's bigger than me. He's good looking. All these beautiful women throw themselves at him. Nope, I can't like him. Ended up being a really good friend. And it's funny is, as throughout the time, I ended up finding out that he was insecure of me.
It's so interesting. Yeah, the relationships that we men have with each other, it has a lot to do how we feel about ourselves. So of course,
Absolutely.
it's going to extend to how we look at other men. And I want to be just like that guy. I want to be built like that. I want traps like that. I want legs like that. I want that ego, And of course, I want women looking at me like they look at him. It's human nature. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. We want to be respected, especially men. We want to be respected. It's, for heterosexual by women, but I think most men want to be respected by men also.
Yep.
So it's interesting hearing that. What do you do when you kind of fall in, because you're human and we're not perfect, when you fall into that, when maybe the ego is getting the best of you, when maybe you're kind of like, oh, I kind of like what's, kind of maybe jealous or something about seeing another guy and maybe his success or anything, when you see yourself falling, what do you do to kind of, get yourself in order?
So I pay attention as to where I'm feeling it in my body first. And so like if I see another dude at the gym and I feel insecure of him in some way, I'll sit there and be like, all right, Dillon, I understand. Actually, I'll frame this the way I actually do it. So I look at my ego as a third person, right? And I've actually named my ego Kevin. And the reason being is because the name Kevin was the name of a droid bot on a cartoon that was just like this annoying little droid bot. And the cartoon, what the heck was it called? Final Space. And I found so much humor in it. And so then I'm able to disassociate the thought of like, I'm breaking it up. So I'm creating humor by calling my ego Kevin, because I associate it with that show. And then I talk to it as a third person, almost like it's just like I'm in my head and I'm like confronting them. Kind of like if a person was to do inner child work and writes to their inner child.
Okay.
And so I'm like, all right, I feel you, I see you, what's going on? And then I will scan myself and basically introspect is like, okay, where in my life am I failing to show up that is creating this insecurity in myself? And most often, like, so let's say it is in the gym, it's after a stint where I've been a little bit lazy, right? I'm not holding myself accountable to my own standard, right? Or if I see somebody driving a vehicle that I'm a little envious of, and it's like, well, I want a vehicle like that, but why can't I have a nice vehicle like that one specifically?
Right.
So then I take a step back and it's like, okay, well, that have I been working towards that specifically? Right? This dude that has like the beautiful six pack, have I been working towards that specifically? The person that has anything like that. And then so I think back to myself, I'm like, you know what? Every single one of our lives is if you were to take a deck of cards and throw it up in the air, what are the chances of it falling down the exact same way twice? And that is how each of their individual lives are, right? Very 100% unique to us. And these individuals who have these things that we are envious of, there's something that they very well could be envious over us for. And I basically put myself into that frame as like, we're all just figuring this out as we go along. And the thing is like, okay, that specific car, it's not my time to have that. Because in reality, if I really wanted that car, I would be doing everything to figure out about getting that car. But the biggest thing that I do with all of the self-reflection stuff is I sit back and I'm like, do I actually want this? Or do I just think I want this because society is holding an expectation of me, or I believe society is holding an expectation of me to want this? Because the vast majority of this stuff is no, I don't want most of these things that I feel like I'm envious over, but I feel like I should be. I feel like I should have it, that I should have the sports car, that I should have the mansion, that I should have, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like, I don't actually want it for myself. I just think I want it. And so like, for example, I live in Alberta. In Alberta, if you work in the oil field, as a man, you drive a lifted truck. You just do. That is the expectation. And so it's weird if you see a guy not driving a lifted truck. And when I step back, there's something like, yeah, that's a very nice lifted truck. Do I actually want to lift a truck? No, I don't want to pay for that fuel mileage. Right? I don't want to have to get anything that I tow behind me modified to be able to accommodate the lifted truck. Right? But I have that belief that I think so. So I that's the question I ask myself most is, do I actually want it? Or am I just still sliding back to social conditioning that I used to hold on to years ago?
I like that. Self-reflection is a beautiful thing. It's a really good and mature thing to be able to do. I like the fact that you use something that a lot of us would take and maybe we'd feel down about it. I want that car, I want that girl, and we feel down about it. And you use it for motivation. Do I really want that? Well, if I do, this is what I have to do to get it. And a lot of thought. That's just another mature thing that we men should do. We don't all do, but we get there. So that's good to hear also. You've said this word a few times and it just kind of works out. The last letter in the word prize is E. The word is expectation. Expectation is a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. So I'm going to shift a little bit here. You are a confidence coach. So if you wouldn't mind, give us an idea of what it's like, maybe the first time we talk to you. And then once, maybe I'm your client, we start getting into it. What are you expecting from me while we're working together, and what to expect, hopefully, when we've completed our time together?
What I expect from you as a client is effort. Is the one thing. Okay, so I'm gonna answer your question indirectly before I go directly. So I used to be a personal trainer as well. And the one thing that really bugged me as a personal trainer is so many people would hire me as a trainer as a scapegoat. Like, oh, I can eat this junk food because I have a trainer. I'm just going to train harder later. And then when they don't hit their goal, they go back and blame me because they didn't hit their goal. And it's like, well, no, Jessica, I followed you home because we live near each other. You can't fucking go to McDonald's after our session and expect us to lose weight. And she's, oh, you seen that? Yes, actually, I did. So, as a confidence coach, that scenario is no different. Is I have the expectation I hold is for you to do the work, and the work we do together will only work as well or as hard as you do. So, doing the work is vulnerable and uncomfortable. So an exercise that I have a lot of my clients do, because a lot of them is simply, a lot of it is making friends, talking to people, being able to make eye contact with talking people. It's like, okay, so I want you to go out this week and I want you to start 10 conversations, 30-second conversations. And it can be as simple as like, hey man, those are really nice shoes. Because I don't know about you or if you've ever noticed this, but if you walk up to another dude and give him a compliment, especially if it's like on their shoes or their shirt, you see how a guy lights up, right? Like, how do you light up when a guy gives you a compliment?
It's been a while since I've had it.
It hits differently than when a woman does. It really does. And I learned this when I was working in the nightclubs, right? There's a lot of women, especially if they're, let's use, even though I hate the scale, but let's say they're higher up on the scale of attractivity or attractiveness, sorry. If a dude goes up to another dude, so like when I would go up to a guy, I'd be like, man, I just have to give you a compliment. You have a fantastic smile. And you'd see them be like, what? Thanks, man. Like, I appreciate that. Like, it was just like I made their entire week because it was a guy giving another guy a compliment, because we don't do that. And I honestly, so that is one thing that is an exercise that I get my clients to do, is like, yeah, go and start some conversations, compliment somebody on their shoes, compliment somebody on their dog as you go for a walk, right? Go give a woman a compliment, but not, like, hey, you're an attractive, like, give her a compliment on her hair. You're like, wow, that is a phenomenal haircut. Something along those lines that other people aren't going to have that expectation of you. And the thing is what I learned when I first started doing this was that we were so afraid of how they're going to receive us. But everyone else also has that same fear. So it's the butterfly effect, right? If we're putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone to then go up and give this person a compliment, we're throwing them off just as much as we're throwing off ourselves. We're literally changing the world around us just by changing ourselves, by one simple small act of kindness. And when I started doing this, when I get my clients to do this, they notice the same thing. Every other aspect around them changes, right? It's just simple, one act of kindness. All of a sudden they catch it. Like, why are people staring at me? Well, that's because you're vibing higher, right? You are putting off a good, healthy energy and people are picking up to that. And so like, it's a simple change, right? It's like, as Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world, right? A simple expression of kindness or a compliment is something that is so small, but yet we work it up to be so big in our heads, right? Like, how often when you were in the dating scene did you work it up in your head to go and talk to the girl wherever it was, at the gym, at the club, the grocery store, right? We make it to be this extravagant thing. It's just a conversation. Be kind, right? That's all. That's one of the biggest things that I think all of us need in our life is more kindness. And so that would be the expectation that I hold of my clients, is putting in the work, stepping into that vulnerability. And the more we step into that vulnerability, the less vulnerable we feel, right? And I explained that it's like, when you jump into a lake or you start teetering into a lake and it's really cold until you get used to it. Well, every step deeper you take into the water, it feels a little bit colder until it's all the way up and you realize, wow, it's not actually that cold. Well, it's because you're used to the vulnerability of the cold water.
Okay.
So it's putting in the work, right? I use an analogy with my clients all the time as to, if I was to give you a book on how to ride a unicycle, are you going to know how to ride a unicycle after reading it? No. What would you actually have to do to know how to ride a unicycle? Practice, right? You can read every personal development book under the sun, all of them, and some of them will make some ahas click, but unless you actually put the work into doing the exercises in the books, you're going to be exactly where you are, right? Or you're going to be reaching for more personal development books to distract yourself from actually doing the work, creating busy work, thinking that we're making progress when we're just putting off the inevitable more procrastination, right? Consuming knowledge, but not creating wisdom because we don't have the experience.
I like it. Is that, I would imagine, right when you start with a potential client, is that an important part of the introduction? this is only going to work with as much as you put in. I'm going to give you everything, but I need it from you. Have you had somebody say, you know what? I don't think I can do it, and not become a client?
I've had not that specific. What I've had is people start up, give it a couple weeks, and then they just ghost me.
Oh, wow.
So, which is unfortunate, because the thing is like, as I said in the very beginning, I want to see every single person succeed. And I give as much as myself to my clients as I can, within boundaries, limitations and whatnot. But as a coach to a client, I give myself as much as possible. And I affirm to them that, like, I am here for you. Like, I am not somebody who was born with confidence. Like, I give so many different stories to show them, like, I had to do these steps. I had to take these steps. I am not better than anyone else at all. I might be a couple of steps ahead on the journey, and I'm reaching out my hand, come on, grab my hand, and we're going to do this together. And, they get excited, and a lot of them will be great. And then we have some of those very vulnerable conversations where I can see the look in their face of, like, they did not realize, like, wow, like this is actually some real self-reflection. And unfortunately, it's something that they hired me hoping that simply because they were going to have a confidence coach, I was going to be their scapegoat.
I hear that. It's hard. Yeah. It's self-reflection. I mean, you mentioned it before, but self-reflection and really looking in to yourself, acknowledging whatever issues you may have had might have been you. You can't blame other people. And that's when it gets hard.
It is. And a lot of my work is with my clients is like every aspect of our own lives is, even though something outside of us might have happened, it's our responsibility to change it. And a lot of people don't like hearing that, right? There are outside circumstances, there are outside things that can be at fault for our unhappiness. But if we sit there in that, that's our own fault. If we sit back and point fingers to all of this, well, this person did this to me and I feel this way, and this person did this to me and I feel this way. Well, we only have control over one thing in our life. And it's how we decide to respond to every situation as opposed to reacting to the situation. So, like, is as unfortunate as it is in a lot of situations that happen, there is a silver lining to absolutely everything. There is a lesson to be learned in absolutely everything. And it might be something as simple as to, if you lose somebody in your life, making sure that when you talk to people, you're there, you're present, because you don't actually know if you're going to get another conversation with them. And, as cryptic as that can sound, is when we lose somebody, it's a very real thing. There are so many people out there that believe that won't happen to us. It won't happen to us. That's not something that we have to deal with until we do. And so when we finally step into the shoes of, like, hey, this is my life. My life is my responsibility, no one else's. That's when we first start to be able to take that journey, I feel. And we won't truly step into that personal development where we're ready to change until we're finally sick of our own shit.
Agreed. You put it in the most layman and most basic of terms. I like that. Well said. The final letter in the word prize, at least in the middle in terms of this, is I. And I don't associate that with the word. I think that fits the man. So we've talked about your purpose, resilience, zeal, your expectation. Let's say, and we're just speaking for you, Dillon, we take away all the shackles, all the titles that are kind of associated with us. So you are not a friend, entrepreneur, coach, weightlifter, bouncer, all these things that we do. When you throw all that stuff away and it's just you at your core, at your most basic, who are you?
That is That's a very good question. And I'm still on that journey of completely figuring that out. I actually recently just went through a situation where I had what felt like my entire identity ripped out away from me, actually just within the most recent months. Um, it was I can actually share that story with you if you want.
Yes, sir.
So there was a day where I was just in a weird space, and basically that morning, my girlfriend and I were having a conversation about needing to have more fun in our relationship, because I'm an empath, she's an empath. And so a lot of our relationship was based around intuitiveness, right? Like, well, why do we do this when we think of this? Or why do we feel this way when this happens, right? And so there was a lot of personal development and ego poking between the two of us. And I told her, I'm like, I don't know how to have fun. And this was a realization that I was having just recently, is like, because I was unable to have fun without some sort of hidden guilt or resentment towards it. And so this morning that we had this conversation, we basically had a deal. It's like, all right, we got to start having more days where we're not introspecting so much. Because as I told you, I enjoy the why. Why do we think this way? Why do we do this thing? And of all people, male lady comes in. She's like, how you doing today? And I'm like, I'm doing good, thanks. Like, how are you? And this is a woman that I don't have conversations with. It's a, hey, good morning, have a good day. And then that's about it. And she's like, oh, well, just the last time I saw you, you didn't seem like you were doing so well. And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess you were on vacation, hey? And I remember the day I saw her, I was in a funk. Like, if you walked in, there was probably a physical storm cloud above my head. Like, it was not a good day. And so I'd apologize to her for that. And she's like, don't ever apologize for having a bad day. We're all entitled to have bad days. Like, it is a part of life. And so I'd asked her, I'm like, are you an intuitive individual? And she's like, yeah, I can be, but if I focus too much on it, I end up losing where I'm at. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And so you ever have those people where they ask you a question and all of a sudden you just have like verbal diarrhea come out? Yes. And this is a complete stranger. All right. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of those people, right? I'll go to the grocery store and then I'll ask the cashier how you're doing. And she's like, I'm good, but blah. And then oh, I'm so sorry. So this happened to me. And like this, I was weird being on the other end of feeling like I had verbal diarrhea. And so I told her about my conversation with my girlfriend that morning. And then she sits there and she's like, huh, did you have someone in your life that was an alcoholic? And I'm like, yeah, my dad is an alcoholic. She's like, huh, did you feel like you had to grow up a little bit earlier than what would be deemed the social norm or standard? And I'm like, yeah, I did. That's actually to a T, I did. And she's like, huh, you should check out Al-Anon. And I'd heard of Al-Anon, but I never looked into it. And so I did. And I went to one, I guess it'd be a virtual meeting now. But so I listened in on one, and listening to all these individuals speak, I related with every single one of them. And it was essentially, so my entire personal development journey was based off of beliefs of a narrative that I was originally telling myself that had nothing to do with the potential damage from the alcoholism that I was subjected to as a kid. And so basically it felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath me, because everything I was working towards and these tools that I was working on to explore these parts of myself completely changed, because it's like, that's not even the root. The root was alcohol. And then all of a sudden, so I started this exercise where on every day, or not every day, but at least every other day, I have a journal now where I'll actually pick an age, where, like 6-year-old Dillon, and I will write to him as if it is a different person, like, hey, like I'm 30 years old now. And then I explain, like, this is how my life is going. There's lots to be thankful for. And then I start telling my inner child, I'm sorry I haven't been there for a while, but I have something I want to tell you, is that, don't worry about your self-confidence at this time, right? Because when you're 30 years old, you're going to be a very confident individual, basically telling the inner child in me what they need to hear, right? And I remember having a day where, like, those days where you just feel beside yourself, and coming home, I was talking to my girlfriend that day after the Al-Anon thing. She was away for a couple days and she came home, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel. Like I felt like almost out of body, like I was just a shell. And I came home and I just cried. Because I didn't know who I was anymore. And then after that, I was like, whoever the fuck I want to be. I can be whoever I want to be. And it's just me. I am just me without a label. I don't have to have a title. I don't have to hold myself to anybody else's expectations other than what I want to do. And the things in my life that I'm doing is because it's my choice, not because I feel like I have to. And it was freeing. It was very freeing. And then, so like, it was like this 4 to 6 week lull. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who's very much deals with energy work and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, well, have you ever heard or read of the Dark Night of the Soul? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And so I started doing some reading. That's essentially is what it is your loss of your identity. And it feels like you lose a chunk of yourself because your ego doesn't know what to do with itself anymore, because it was trying to keep you from feeling vulnerable from a very specific version of yourself that you were building a story around. And so the entire story that I had built for myself was inaccurate. So by going through this dark night of the soul, it was like that true mental realization that we can change our lives by changing the narrative of our story. We just have to change how we're telling ourselves. And so when we look back at our past and all of the stuff that we went through, even if we don't want to, like, we blame others for a lot of different things, right? Whether or not it's our parents and whether or not it's friends that became enemies or, enemies. But in reality is when you realize that every single person that we feel that wronged us did what they thought was right at that moment of time with the knowledge that they had. And that if they did wrong us, it's more or less due to their own insecurities being projected onto us and not having anything to do with us. Unless we did something that was completely morally wrong, of course. But for the most part, I know for myself, right, I was one of those people that was always there. I was a people pleaser, gave every morsel of myself to everyone else, and always felt like I got stepped on, and then would blame others. So, well, I did that to myself. I was the one that gave so much of myself, having the expectation that they were going to give that much back to me. But nobody thinks the way that we do, right? We are our own person, and our life is 100% unique to us. So to kind of wrap that in a nutshell, to describe myself is I'm just me. That is the best way. I can't title it any specific way, because I am now, it's like the whiteboard has been completely erased, and I'm currently writing who I am daily, and basically focusing on being 1% better, and butterfly affecting the ripple of the butterfly effect of just spreading kindness to other people in hopes that it's going to, pay it forward eventually, and with the hopes of just leaving this world a little bit better because I was here.
Does all that has happened recently, has it changed the way you coach people?
It does actually. A deeper level of understanding and empathy. And so it's like I was able to take my listening skills up to another to another level, because as now it's like, as I'm listening to somebody speak of the hurt, I'm now focusing on where their inner child's speaking from. And then by creating that deeper level of understanding, it's like when I respond to whatever it is that they say, and these questions that I would ask, I'd frame it as if I'm talking to them and 5-year-old them. And, you know, when you ask a 5-year-old a really self-reflecting question and they sit there like, huh, and you can just smell the oil burning in the gears, right? And so that's basically is now how I'm able to help my clients or even friends and family that I have these conversations with just kind of get to that aha. And, you know, there's a little part of me that gets excited where I get somebody a good question like that, and they sit there with that look on their face, just like, huh, I have never thought of that way before.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little piece of me that's just like, yes, got it. And I love it because it's simply just changing that perception of what's going on around us, right? Around them and around life, right? And it's phenomenally exciting to realize that if we just change the way we look at everything around us, our entire lives change. It's as simple as that, right? When we wake up in a state of gratitude, we're going to be thankful for a lot more stuff, right? It's like the saying, you know, the grumpier you are, the more assholes you meet.
So much.
Right. So if we stop being grumpy and blaming everyone else for how we feel inside, you know, it's not an overnight thing, but eventually you start seeing the good, right? It's just the other stupid saying of like, well, bad things happen in 3. Well, yeah, when you're looking for them, it's going to. It's the yellow car law, right? When you see a vehicle there, you're like, ooh, that's a really nice vehicle. All of a sudden you start seeing that car everywhere.
Oh
it's the same thing with opportunity. When we start looking for opportunity, we start seeing opportunity everywhere. And this is how I think the law of attraction actually works. It's actually the law of action, because when you start taking action towards certain things in your life, all of a sudden we start seeing the opportunities that actually lead us to whatever it is that we're trying to manifest.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I like hearing you talk. Was maybe the most empathetic thing I've ever heard. Your explanation of how we deal with other people and whatever happens to us really has less to do with us. We're kind of just the vessel that kind of received what the person was doing, but it's really them acting out or for whatever they think is going on, whatever they think is best. And that's such an interesting way of looking at life. It centers you. It's like, I'm not this bad person. I was just the one there. It's so interesting. I love the way you said that. Well done. Thank you for answering the questions in the word prize of that mantra. I have a few more questions and I will I will let you go.
Absolutely.
What are you afraid of that you can not control?
Like actual fear? Like of like
Anything.
being buried alive or drowning?
Anything. Well, yeah, anything. It can be literal, it can be anything.
Okay, so like a literal fear, I actually felt this in my core watching a movie. It was one of the Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland, where he gets buried under rubble and his arms were stuck at his sides.
Oh,
I literally like almost had a panic attack, because like if unless you're a superhero and you're gonna die because your arms are stuck to your sides and it's just your head sticking out. Like I watched that, I'm like, okay, like no, no. I'm like, okay, I guess I have a little bit of claustrophobia. So yeah, a literal fear that would be, it is getting that buried alive, something along those lines, or you know, drowning, because there is some sort of just really heavy fear of what's under the water in the ocean or even in the middle of a really deep lake. Like I remember looking over the boat and feeling my stomach just flip. It's like, whoa, nope, if I'm jumping in, I'm looking up, not down.
I hear you, man. I hear you. Other side of the coin, what are you afraid of that you can control?
See, that's a really good one. There right now, what's speaking out to me is missed opportunity due to being stubborn. One of the biggest lessons that I have learned in the last, well, really big in the last year, but it's been one that's just been keep on rolling over, because apparently I don't want to fully learn the lesson, is letting go of the idea of what could be and accepting the reality that is right now. Because I am an individual that will go to bat over and over and deplete myself over and over in relationships. And this stems to the people pleasing thing. And when I look back, there was a lot of opportunities that were sitting there just like slapping me in the face, like over and over. But because I was so stubborn, fixed on this one thing, so I'm like, nope, I will make this work, instead of just like, you know what? Be free, because these opportunities here are literally presenting themselves and knocking at the door, but I'm keeping it closed. So staying in my own way is allowing my ego to regain control in some sort of way, because I have been on this journey long enough to know that it is possible to slide back down. And when we slide back down, it feels so much worse, because we're down on ourselves for sliding back down. So it's not just the initial fall, it's the fall and then being mad at ourselves for the fall. And then, having resentments towards ourselves. And then just like, it's this loop that just goes down and down and down. And, I know myself. And the thing is like, I do have an addictive personality. Whereas like when I first started working out, it wasn't because I loved myself. It was because I hated myself. Like I went to the gym to destroy my body. I trained collectively for 3+ hours every single day until I couldn't use that body part. And then, as I said, I had an issue with alcohol in my teens. And then even in the intro part of the nightclubs, I was having a little bit of issues around taking painkillers when I didn't necessarily need to take painkillers. And, it's like, I'm an individual, like I enjoy pot from time to time. If you're watching a good movie or playing some video games, it's like, yeah, let's just enjoy a little bit. But in my past, right, I was smoking it every day after working at the clubs because I needed to wind down. And then I started making excuses for myself. It was like, oh, well, this will just be more enjoyable because of this. It was like, well, if I can't find the enjoyment in the act itself, I'm not going to find more enjoyment being stoned. And then in addition to that, right, like I smoke pipe tobacco. And it was actually a gift that I got from my friend when my ex-fiance had left. And I quite enjoy pipe tobacco. I enjoy the process. You sit, ponder while smoking on something that reminisces of your grandfather because of the smell, right? Working in the clubs, I had so many people around me that just smoked. I didn't want to carry my pipe, so they'd offer me a cigarette. So I started smoking, right? And then I started getting that mentality of like, oh, I need to smoke. And so knowing that I have the addictive personalities for the vices and stuff like that, like it is a very slippery slope. And so I personally have to be very mindful of myself to keep myself in check, because actually the biggest addiction that I've had that I haven't even said yet has been food, because I have put so much of my self-worth in food. Like when I was in my low spot, I would eat until I've eaten myself to the point of throwing up before. Purely, but I would tell myself it was based in a scarcity mindset and a self-worth mindset. And so like it was all this negative attachments to it. And to the point like where, yeah, I would eat myself to the point of throwing up, or I'd convince myself like, oh, well, I don't know when I'm going to have this again. Oh, well, I haven't had this in so long. It's fine this time. Go to a buffet, which, I enjoy a Chinese food buffet from time to time, but then I would leave hating myself. Or holiday feasts. Right. Oh, well, I don't know when I'm going to get this the next time. The next holiday, Dillon. I'm going to get it the next holiday. I don't need to do this to myself. But yet for so long and for so many years, I did that to myself all the time. And so now I have all these little tricks and stuff like that I do to make sure that I don't do that. Right. So like I'll take half of what I would normally take, eat it, sit there for 20 minutes, be like, okay, do I actually want something? Okay, maybe I want a little bit more stuffing on this go. So I'll go and have some more stuffing, wait a little bit, right? my food's not going to run away from me. It's already dead. So I can slow myself down. But anyways, would be one of my fears, is allowing myself basically to have my ego take over control again because of some sort of catastrophic events taking place that would be very difficult to emotionally cope.
Okay. Last question. So I've spoken to a lot of men, and we've kind of driven around this point and hit it at times, that we have to be comfortable being able to speak about our emotions, talk about what's going on in our lives, how whatever we grew up in affects us. And I think through talking to men is that I feel like men want to talk. We want to express ourselves. We want to let it out. And for me, I get the feeling that we don't have access to it. And when I mean access, I mean, I would love to tell somebody what's going on, but we don't all have somebody to tell what's going on. A lot of men, two things that I found: we don't value ourselves enough to recognize that we need to take care of ourselves, personally take care of ourselves. And two, we don't always value ourselves enough to recognize that we need to talk to somebody, therapist, friend, mentor, coach, whatever. So my question for you is, right now, and obviously you kind of mentioned this in the past, but right now, do you have a person where if you did something stupid, let's say you went to the buffet and you ate stupid for no reason, and it's like, why? That you could call right now and you could say, I just did something dumb. I ate way too much. I feel like shit right now. And you'd have a friend who could talk to you, hear you, constructively criticize you like a friend does. But when that conversation is done, you'd feel good about it because you're able to let it out. Do you have that person?
I'm actually very, very fortunate to have two in my life. And the first one is my girlfriend. She has, through the course of our relationship, she's actually become my best friend, and we hold each other accountable for all that sort of stuff. And I know that with her is actually the first time I'm in my life that I've actually been able to be myself and be vulnerable without the fear of judgment. Like, I swear, like, she is a unicorn. she is something else phenomenal, and I can't say enough good things about her as a person. And so, yeah, my first one is like, even if I was with her, like, she'll even look at me and be like, hey, like, you think that's a good idea? And not with judgment, but because I've told her before we go to dinner, be like, please hold me accountable. And she'll just watch, and she expects the same as me from me too. And so yeah, my girlfriend, and then my one of my best friends, and actually he's the co-host to my YouTube channel. He's a coach as well, but more for athletes specifically. Like, his slogan is the everyday athlete, and he helps people who used to be athletes rediscover themselves in life because their identity is surrounded by being an athlete.
Right.
And he's a very intelligent individual, and he has a way with questionings. Like, I've asked him questions where I think I'm pretty savvy on, and then he'll blow my mind. I'd be like, man, like, how do you do? Like, I spend hours researching this stuff. Like, how do you do that? Like, he just has such a unique way to look at life. And his one of the things I admire about him most is his give a fuck. It's just like, meh, whatever. Just like, can't change it. And he's just able to go with the flow. And I absolutely adore him for it. And so those would be my two people that I am so thankful and fortunate to have in my life for that specifically.
That's good. We don't all have somebody like that. For you to have more than one, I'm not religious, but it's a blessing. It's a good thing to have.
Very much is. And up until recently, I didn't. Like, I did have individuals who I thought so, but as going through the process of personal development and learning, or psychology and learning, realizing that when I would open up to them, how everything would always be spun back around to something about them. Right. You open up to somebody, about a story or something you're going through, and it's like, oh, well, you know what? It's like, it's not that bad. I'm going through this. It's like, well, we're not talking about you right now. We're actually talking about me. Like, that's what I needed. Right. So, and even when I first started coaching, I noticed that so much, right? As a lot of my friendships started becoming free counseling sessions for them.
Mm-hmm. I know the feeling. I know the
Yeah,
feeling. Dillon, this has been a fantastic conversation. I thank you so much for being open about yourself, about, what
absolutely.
you've gone through growing up and even currently. Where can people find you? Social media, website, tell us what's going on. Where can people find you?
So my Instagram is at coach.wolverine. That's where the vast majority of my content gets put. Aside from that, my website is the wolverinelifestyle.com. And then I have a YouTube channel with my buddy. It's actually called A Conversation Over Drinks, where we talk about things that are vulnerable, and quite often while doing something physically vulnerable. So like our first handful of conversations was us standing out in Canadian winter in board shorts, talking about vulnerable topics of mental health and whatnot. So those are my three main ones. And then my email, coach@thewolverinelifestyle.com.
Fantastic. I will put all of that in the episode notes. So for all the listeners and watchers who want to talk to somebody, you never know, you may find a coach or somebody who can help. Every bit of information you need will be in the episode notes. Thank you so much for talking with me. I really, really appreciate your time. Special shout out to Kristen McGriff. She's the one that reads the outro and the intro. So when you heard this episode, there's a smooth voice, female voice to make you feel good about listening to all this male, just emotional stuff. And she ends it too. So thank you to Kristen McGriff. She has a podcast called Candid Shop Podcast. Give it a listen. Thank you to the listeners, to the watchers. Thanks for everybody who just gives this format an opportunity. Thanks for listening to Men Are the Prize, the podcast where your inner monologue is revealed. I'll see you next week. Have a good one.